Good morning, fourth grade. Can you believe it's already Friday of this first week? I am so excited that it is almost the weekend already, and I know that you are too. I have several of you that are at home in quarantine or not feeling well yourself, and so I just want you to know you're not missing anything here at school, that you're doing a great job. We are doing exactly what you're doing online in class, and so don't feel like you're missing anything besides your friends and hanging out and your awesome teacher. But we do miss you. We do miss you, but we will see you soon. And I'm just so glad that you know exactly what to do and that you are getting your work done. So we're going to move on today to a new nonfiction book. And this nonfiction book is a biography. Do you remember what a biography is? Remember, a biography is where an author tells the story about someone else's life. An autobiography would mean they told the story about their own life. So if I was to write a story about myself, that would be an autobiography. But because someone else is telling the story, it is a biography. This is the true story of Bessie Coleman, who was the first African-American pilot. So she had some obstacles. If she was the first African-American pilot, I can probably infer that she had some challenges. And so we're going to learn about those challenges as we read this book. Here we go. The heading here says early years. 100 years ago in Waxahachie, Texas, Bessie Coleman walked 4 miles to her one-room schoolhouse and 4 miles home. Bessie loved numbers, and learning numbers was worth waiting those long, dusty miles past tenant farms and cotton fields and small, shabby houses. We don't have a lot of farms around here. We have a lot of cattle and livestock farms, but we don't have a lot of produce farms. So a tenant farm is a land and crops that belong to someone else, but people had to work for them in those farms. And so people owned the land and the crops, but other people had to take care of it. Bessie Coleman was a reader too. Twice a year, a library wagon stopped in front of her small home on Palmer Road. And twice a year, Bessie's mother, Susan Coleman, used her ironing money to rent books for Bessie to read. Books about people whose skin was the color of Bessie's. People like Harriet Tubman and Booker T. Washington. They were somebody, all right. And you can't see very good, but the somebody is in italics. Why do you think, or I want you thinking about why the author does that? Because we're going to see it several more times throughout this book. And I want you thinking, why does he italicize that word somebody? Susan Coleman had just been 10 years old when the Civil War ended. The daughter of Georgia's slaves, she couldn't read or write, but she had a big heart and spoke with kind words. Susan knew how to plant seeds, pick cotton, and teach her children to love God. Bessie's father, George, who was part Indian, couldn't read or write either. The Colemans had 13 children, and Bessie was the 10th child born into this big family. 4 of the Coleman children died at early ages. Even so, Susan kept her strong faith in the Lord. When Bessie was 9 years old, her father left his family behind and headed for Oklahoma. Maybe tribal lands and customs would bring him a better life than a Texas cotton town. Now times in Waxahachie were even harder for Susan Coleman and the youngest children still at home. But Susan had her Bible, and every night Bessie read aloud to her mother and her 3 little sisters, slowly, then faster, as she got better with the Lord's words. School was where Bessie wanted to be, not dragging a picker sack through the cotton fields of Texas. But in August and September, where the green cotton bolls split open, fluffy white, Bessie couldn't go to school. It was time to pick cotton. Some years, her school doors were shut until November or December. Cotton picking mattered more to the town than numbers and books. Every hand was needed, and for poor folks like the Colemans, heavy sacks of cotton meant food on the supper table. How do you think having to be a tenant farmer, taking care of other people's crops and stuff, how do you think that affected Bessie's childhood and her education? Yeah, I think it really brought down her being able to keep growing in her reading and her education because she didn't have a chance to go to school. Like it even said they shut down the school so that all the children could work in these fields. Many times at the end of those long days, Bessie stood next to the head foreman, checking his numbers. She wanted to make sure that the cotton her family had picked was weighed fair and square. Susan Coleman had a proud smile when she saw her Bessie write down those numbers and figure out the sums. Someday that girl would be somebody. And right here, it used that somebody in italics again. So keep thinking about that. Why do you think she checked the foreman's numbers? Why do you think she went to the boss here and was like, well, this is how many we had, and I added it all up? Why do you think she did that? I think it was so that she could practice her schooling. It gave her a chance to practice her arithmetic and her math skills when she didn't have that chance to. From the start, Bessie Coleman has always been a walker and a counter. Now, as she grew older, Bessie was a dreamer. On Saturdays, Bessie walked 5 miles across the streets of Waxahachie, taking cleaning shirts to the big houses of folks who had money. And Bessie walked 5 miles home to her sisters and her mom with another sack of laundry to wash and press. Maybe if she saved enough ironing money, she could get a better education. Beyond the skimpy 8 grades in that one-room schoolhouse. With more schooling, she could be somebody. Several years later, at the age of 18, Bessie took up classes at a university in Oklahoma. The students there in Langston had dark skin too. Bessie was placed in the 6th grade. But the classes cost too much for a country girl. After only 1 term, Bessie had to come back home to the 3-room house on Palmer Road. Do you think it was easy for Bessie to go to school? No, I think it was very hard, and we know that because the text says she walked 5 miles every weekend just to make enough money to pay for only 1 semester of school. So, and it put her in the 6th grade. It even put her at a college level. It used the word skimpy, beyond the skimpy 8 grades. What do you think skimpy might mean? Yeah, like it wasn't very good. There wasn't much of it. Chicago years. So you notice the heading has changed. So that lets me know that we're kind of going into a different part of her life. Chicago, head north. There are jobs for all. Lots of folks from the South heard those words. Maybe Walter, an older brother, could help Bessie find a bigger life there. Walter was somebody. He had moved to Chicago years before when Bessie was little. Now Walter was a fine Pullman porter. It was Bessie's time to try again. She was 23 years old when she moved to Chicago. The year was 1915, a busy time for the big, big city up north. Chicago had tall buildings and trains and streetcars. The wide sidewalks were full of talk and news. Chicago had the wind off Lake Michigan and deep winter snows and was miles away from the dirt floor cabin where Bessie had been born. In Chicago, you could be somebody. Now Bessie needed a job. There were many barber shops in South Chicago, and most of them had manicurists. Bessie knew she could learn how to trim and file nails. It was a lot easier than picking cotton. If she were fast at it, she could make good money, and that's just what Bessie did. First, she worked in a shop on State Street. Then she moved to Duncan's barber shop on East 36. While Bessie clipped and filed nails, she listened to Chicago baseball talk and the deep voices and stories of men. Big city life was new, and it was fun. Bessie was still a reader. Every day she read the pages of the Chicago Defender and a newspaper for her people, published by Robert Abbott. Robert Abbott was somebody, and his work was news. Bessie wrote letters of her life in Chicago back to Texas. Soon the rest of the Coleman family moved north to the big, windy city. What can we infer about Bessie so far? If you could take one inference of her this far, what would you say about her? Would you make a conclusion that she's maybe determined? Could you make a inference that she is a hard worker? I think so. In the fall of 1919, Duncan's was abuzz with the stories of soldiers who had fought in the trenches of France. Bessie's brother Walter and John had served in that war too, and now they were back in Chicago, home safe and sound from the battles of World War I. Bessie Coleman was a good listener. As she filed and buffed her customers' nails near the front window of the shop, Bessie heard tales of French women who could fly airplanes. John Coleman told Bessie, "Those French lady pilots, they are somebody." Off to France. From then on, Bessie wanted to fly. The pilots and the aviators in Abbott's Chicago Defender led exciting lives. If they could learn to fly, so could she. All she needed was a good teacher. But Bessie was a woman with dark skin. And she didn't have much money. The only pilots in Chicago were men, white men. None of them would teach her to fly a plane. But Bessie Coleman, who had walked 4 miles to school and back to learn her numbers, who had walked 5 miles and back to earn money, didn't give up her plan to learn how to fly a plane. Someday she would be a somebody on Chicago's South Side. Robert Abbott would know a teacher. Robert Abbott was the man to see. "You could learn to fly in France," Abbott told Bessie. "If you earn some money and learn to speak French, then I'll help you find a flying school." Bessie worked and saved and saved and worked, and one day she placed a toy airplane by a neighborhood boy. In the window of Duncan's barber shop, Bessie told herself, "Someday I'll be a pilot. Make small step by small step." What do you think's standing in her way right now of her goals and what she wants? Yeah, the fact that she's a woman, she's poor, she's black, so she has all these things against her to keep her from getting what she wants. But what I can infer so far is that she's not going to give up on that. She is going to keep fighting. So on Monday, we're going to find out just how Bessie learns to fly, maybe.